Welcome. I see our attendees are starting to sign in. So a warm welcome from myself, Natasha Maharaj from Golden Key, the Southern Africa office. We are just going to allow a few moments before we actually begin. While we allow for the rest of the participants to sign in, I would like to ask for those of you that are online, if you maybe just want to use the chat function to pop us a message and let us know who you are and where you are signing in from. So we have UNISA from the Eastern Cape. Welcome and thank you for signing in. Everyone just note, we are giving a few moments for the rest of the attendees to sign in. And while we are doing that, we are using the chat function. Just pop us a message with who you are and where you are signing in from. We will begin shortly. We have Tracy from Pretoria. Good afternoon, Tracy. Thank you for signing in today. Jolene from Kempton Park. Ooh, now it's streaming in. Mosima from Sunnyside. Welcome, everyone. We have V from Pretoria. Camille or Saida from Durban. Welcome. Akueli, I'm hoping I've pronounced that correctly, from Ghana. Welcome and thank you for signing in. We have Gift from Welcome. I'm glad I did not butcher your name. Thank you for confirming that. We have Shirley from Johannesburg. Welcome everyone and thank you for signing in. And we have our Sweden attendee once again. I think it is Annie. Welcome Annie from Sweden. Thank you for signing in today. It looks like we are almost ready to begin. I'm going to hand over to Juanita, who will take over to introduce the speakers for today. Juanita, over to you. You are still
muted. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, everyone, for attending this wonderful session. We are very happy to welcome you to session 3. And the topic for today will be the following. It will be unpacking gender-based violence in our communities, our households and workplaces, definition and characteristics. So we would just like to say from the Golden Key Southern Africa head office, we are so thankful for this wonderful collaboration between Golden Key, UNISA, Father a Nation, Vitality Wellness and SAfAIDS. And I'm going to read the bio for our Master of Ceremonies today, who is Leon Roots from UNISA. Leon Roots is the program convener of postgraduate program of social behavior studies, HIV/AIDS, within the Department of Sociology. He's also the program manager of Teresano collaborative projects focusing on the advocacy of diversity, equity, belonging and inclusion in communities, curriculum and workplaces. Currently, he is the convener of the university's Employee Health and Wellness Working Group and has been involved in this field in various sectors over years, including the development of workplace policy and program frameworks. His MA focused on pathways to manhood, while he is currently working on his PhD, which will present some guidelines on how to implement male-friendly employee health and wellness workplace programs. He also served as chairperson of SAfAIDS South Africa between 2015 until 2020 and provided strategic advice and support to different organizations in both the public and private sector on HIV, health and wellness. It is a great privilege today to welcome you here to this platform, as well as all the presenters and panelists. Thank you. I give over to you, Leon.
Thank you so much, Anita, and thank you for all the preparations to everyone. And yeah, we are very excited that this is the third one. We are full steam going ahead, and we have very positive feedback from the previous 2 webinars that people were very encouraged by the information shared, but also the passion that every presenter brought to the room. So thank you to all of the presenters of the past and today and even in the future. And to you who attend, thank you so much for making time and come during your lunch hour. We hope that you are able to have lunch with us, because today we are like nearly 24 hours online. So with today, we have 3 main speakers, and the intent is to unpack a bit the whole thing of gender-based violence, because, you know, often we talk about it as if every one of us are on the same page, but we're not. And we have to really internalize the understanding, not only by us as individuals, but also by us as a collective. And this is what the webinars are all about. It's all about having a conversation and talking to each other. So I encourage you to please use the chat, talk to us so that we can also monitor your contribution. And also if you have a question or for clarity or maybe a comment to the speakers, we will monitor. And then we will go into the speaker session where we will ask the 3 just to unpack from their area of area that they work into this topic of gender-based violence. And then we will do a bit of a panel. At this stage, it looks like this, Jonita and myself will be the panel, but you know, it's a conversation, so all of us will jump in and start talking to each other like it should be. So without further ado, the first speaker is Teriso Kenyani. She is from SAfAIDS, and she's a program officer at SAfAIDS South Africa. She's also a master in public health candidate that currently busy working with her masters, and also a human rights advocate and facilitator of training in human rights and sexual reproductive health and rights. Teresa is also a peer educator that focuses a lot on working in communities, but she has been working in this field for over 5 years. And one can really hear it when she speaks, that she also speaks as a young person. So the next person that we would like to introduce to you is Edith. And Edith is a seasoned senior development social scientist and strategist with organizational track record working in international organizations in Southern Africa and internationally. She's currently the lead and managing consultant of Vitality Wellness Zimbabwe, and has previously co-authored a book called Tales of Womanhood, talking about women's resilience during difficult times. Edith is also an expert to work in the private and the public sector around issues of decent work, diversity management, and sustainability. She has a very strong background around women empowerment, specifically in the economic side, and managing HIV and AIDS health and wellness in the workplaces. She's also working around poverty reduction strategies with key role players in Zimbabwe and in Southern Africa. She is also a social entrepreneur that really helps also other women by empowering them to become owners of business. She's a board chair of Safe Haven Zimbabwe, an organization committed to support the learning needs of children with autism and providing parent support. She's a travel enthusiast and loves traveling across Africa and in the world, loves cooking to her family, and she always likes to say, Niyazama Nkwandu one day. Shona means may grace be abounded on all of us. Edith lives with her husband and 3 children in Harare, Zimbabwe, and we are very honored to have her. Our last speaker for today is Lizette. Lizette is a mother, a single mother with a daughter. She's a sister, she's a friend, and she's a person living with a disability. She is also a colleague, I must just add to that, and a dear colleague of mine working at UNISA. She is passionate about students and really significantly over the years have contributed quite a lot to gender-based violence in South Africa. She's currently the acting deputy director of student development, that she oversees for the last nearly 26 years in the higher education sector, and focus a lot also on transformation that try to look at student development, including students with disability. She's also the project leader of a current higher health peer education program. She specialized as a social worker in child welfare in Tshwane, focusing on child sexual abuse and family therapy. She later trained as a therapist counselor in South Africa to work with pedophilia and sexual offenders, where she did special court report investigations before sentencing. She was part of an investing team in South Africa that started a special court system for children testifying in court in cases of child sexual abuse and sexual offences involving children, and specifically children in camera. She further specialized over 20 years in sexual harassment and gender-based violence, working with students, managing cases, victim impact assessments, and awareness programs in communities and among students. Then she also had delivered several papers in different national and international organizations and conferences, and also in a professional space of social work. She also worked a lot in the field of diversity management in the university, and also then focus a lot on the issue that they call open cast mining environment, where she assisted women to start also working in that new domain that often was not allowed for women to work. She served as a leadership capacity under the Diversity Trust as a trustee, and was Deputy President of NOHAVO at the previous Technikon South Africa. So very welcome to all three of you. We are very honored to bring actually three very esteemed ladies into this space, who are not only talking from a professional point of view, but also from a gender point of view. So I'm going to ask Teresa just to set for us a bit of a scene, linking the previous webinar to this discussion, and ask her to please come in for 10 minutes, taking us into her topic. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Leon, and good day to everyone, even our attendees, good day. As mentioned, my name is Teresa from SAfAIDS. Now that I'm more knowledgeable on the topic, because when I was preparing my presentation, I realized that I have so many questions more than answers. But today I will be just setting a tone and also tapping back into a bit of what can I say, experiences, though not personal experiences, but experiences when you're living in a rural setting, in an informal setting, as well as coming back from a religious setting. It's mentioned beyond that, we sometimes assume that everyone is on the same page when talking about gender-based violence, but are we really singing the same song? The lyrics are the same, but it's the pitch and everything the same. Because there's one explanation or one definition for what gender-based violence is, but different settings, different contexts define it differently. We're looking into different communities or different settings or contexts. We look to what is gender-based violence, especially in rural settings. What is gender-based violence in informal settings? What is gender-based violence in religious settings? Because we are so governed by different customs, different cultures, different ways of doing things. But one thing to emphasize is the fact that we are really not singing the same song when it comes to gender-based violence. We assume people understand, we assume we are on the same page. We have the same definition, when we commit an act of harmful harm against someone, against their own will. But then again, where do we look into what do we really mean? Because when you look into a religious setting, especially in the times of conflicts, in terms of violence, that is a different setting. It's like everyone for themselves. But women are actually the most one being more affected and everything. So we look at social norms, the way we are constitutionally and socially derived collectively with expectations of appropriate behaviors. That's where one of the gender-based violence roots from, appropriate behaviors. But we're now focusing on only women, how a woman is supposed to be behaving. Harmful social norms that sustain gender-based violence, especially women, especially, when we have women's sexual purity, they're like, a woman has to be pure before getting married, protecting the family's honor over women's safety, especially in kind of conflicts. Your family has to be protected, but what about the woman's safety? men's authority to discipline women and also children. In terms of violence, a man has to show physically that I'm a man. By what? Disciplining this other gender, as we now calling it, modernized the other gender, meaning we, the females. We're looking into those kind of things, and especially women's sexual purity. During conflicts, as I was doing most of my reading or studying, it turns out that most people are trying to actually, teach a lesson to that fellow woman. By what? By sexually violating them so that their family can be deprived of so much, getting married. You have to be married as a virgin, you have to be married when you're not dated or tainted, if I can use terms like that. And we look at the types of gender-based violence, where we're looking at physical, domestic, emotional, psychosocial, verbal, spiritual, financial, and sexual. And most of us are aware or mostly familiar with physical, domestic, as well as sexual violence. When it comes to emotional violence, verbal violence, spiritual, which is the most dominant, but yet little researched and mostly not even reported on, and also sexual violence. This one especially occurs mostly during conflicts, during wars, and it also happens in intimate partner relationships. It also goes back to finances, the way we are raised, the way our young generation is raised. We're always willing to be on the receiving side and not even on the giving side. And which also, I'm not gonna say this because I'm supporting males or men, it sets a tone, it sets a certain tone for a man who's giving and you are not willing to receive, to give back, but you're always receiving. So according to a man's perception, the moment I make that offer to say, okay, for example, let's talk about, I give you flowers, I give you chocolate, or I give you a lift. There's a certain way a man is also having their own expectations. And when you are not reciprocating that back, it leads back to what we normally see as femicides. But little things would have happened in between that relationship, little things would have happened. So when we go back to the context of conflict, gender-based violence in conflict, and it has a lot of devastating consequences, especially on the lives of the conflict-affected persons. This has been documented extensively, especially even now during the COVID. We've experienced, or there've been reports of heightened gender-based violence, especially sexual gender-based violence, even with our own biological fathers, even with our own stepfathers, our brothers. Now we are in the same setting, we're in now one confined space, and now things are happening. Your little 2-year-old has been raped by their own father. It goes deep, it's too damaging and too psychological. Gender-based violence also has been acknowledged as, a weapon of war or conflict. When the other team is fighting, when the other country is fighting with the other country, it leads back to where women are now the center. Women are being raped. There's like arbitrary killings everywhere. This is used to control actually and intimidate the population, the partners. And this is heterogeneous, especially this prevalence and the perpetrators. So we're looking back also with intimate partner conflicts. They are, when I'm going to tap back into a little bit of experiences from my cousins, from my friends, when you're having an intimate partner relationship and during conflict, this partner of yours hits you. After hitting you, you're crying, you're sad, you're upset, but still you guys will end up making up, sexually. You're not in it, but the kind of words, the kind of languages or the scenarios that you get is like, only I understand my partner, I caused it, I shouldn't have done that, I should have not done that. I always make him angry, my partner is not a very angry person. It gets to so many manipulative stages where you, as the victim, blame yourself. You blame yourself so much and you feel like it's your own fault, because women are also tempted to be strong. A failing relationship also lies in a woman. That's your responsibility. A woman has to keep up the home. They have to keep up the relationship, or it can be said it's a devil's work when a relationship is failing, and then they tell you, no, the devil is better than the devil, the angel you do not know. Instead of advising women, these are the red signs. walk away. You know, we go like, okay, and then women are also still being killed by their own family members, their own partners, because of their whole scenario or the language that they use. Only I understand him. I can make him a better person. You know, I'm the one who made him angry. I caused it. I shouldn't have done that. So that's where, especially where gender-based violence especially occurs, especially in conflicts and also in intimate partner conflicts. When I was preparing my slides or my presentation, I was listening to one Miss Leslie Morgensteiner. She's very influential. And she was like, I never thought of myself as a battered woman. You know, the first day he hit me was 3 days before our wedding. We were in our 20s, the first 3 days. So I was like, maybe it's just, you know, the stress of the wedding, everything happening around is just giving him so much stress. She did not look back to say, okay, these are the patterns. It happens once and it can also happen again, you know. And violence against women is known to so much increase during the times of crisis. This has been documented, and I've also emphasized on this. And there comes a time where women, you know, women become isolated. Now women are on one side, they are guarded by this police officer, by the security, who knows that these women are so vulnerable and they can do whatever, you know, to be safe. So that's where they take advantage, you know, because they use violence to actually intimidate or teach both girls, even men, a lesson, especially, but we focus on our females, that they are mostly endangered. And the root cause goes back to our political economy. It goes back to our political economy because there are no structures that are actually supporting, they are supporting our women. Even when we look back into the context we are in right now in South Africa, let's say a young sex worker going into police station to report a case of gender-based violence. The scenes we hear in the community, you know, the stories we get back when we're working with our sex workers, how likely are you to go back to the very same police station to report your cases, or how likely are you ever to go back and report any case to police officers? It's often very limited that our sex workers will say, no, I'll go back again, because they get that they are vulnerable, and now police officers are now taking advantage also. You know, these are people who are supposed to be the duty bearers. They're taking advantage. Now they are raping you again. How likely are you to go back? You know, especially even now during the COVID. This was a very serious crisis, especially one that I've been in, and I've been working with different vulnerable populations. And the stories you hear of gender-based violence, you know, during this kind of crisis, because of the vulnerability that our vulnerable populations are in. You know, we're talking about also our trans people, also our the LGBTQI communities. There's been so many heightened killings, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic or crisis, because there's no structure actually supporting us to actually be able to take on different voices and make it one voice. Everyone now has their own voice. Everyone wants them to be going their own way. So that's basically what I had to just give back to say. Also, when we look at into gender-based violence in informal settlements, we have so many young kids calling themselves into groups and making mob justice or gangsterism, if I can just put it like that, like gangsterism. It goes beyond just physical. You know, your safety in your household. You're in an informal settlement. There's a group of young boys at the corner. Every time you have to pass through that corner as a young woman, it's already emotionally daunting. It's already emotionally stressful. You know, it goes back to say, okay, it's not just physical. They didn't do anything to me, but because I know what they're capable of, and now they're sitting at this corner, and I have to pass through that corner, you know, even if there's no whistle calling or anything relating to that, there's already fear of your own safety. And there's been some documentation that recently, during this crisis of COVID-19, those gangsterism activities have actually escalated so much higher. And another issue, especially during our COVID-19 crisis that we've been having, we've been teaching our young women to be, you know, protect yourself against gender-based violence, but we're leaving out the young men. We're leaving out the young men who are actual cause, instead of saying, do not do this, we are actually giving someone a bulletproof yes, vest to protect from a gunshot. You know, why not take the bullet from that gunshot instead? You know, because even if you have a vest, there are so many other ways in which they can shoot. We're only looking at the chest, your heart, but then again, they can still shoot you on your forehead, they can still shoot you on your legs. That will still be painful at the end of the day. So on another thing, we focus mostly on perpetrators. Even if the perpetrator is apprehended or arrested, they're getting rehabilitation. We're leaving out the victims out there, and we forget that broken people in turn break other people. So the cycle continues, the cycle keeps continuing, and there will never be an end to just gender-based violence, because we are focusing on not holistically, we are focusing on only one person or population at a time, and we are not focusing on gender-based violence holistically. And then also the conflict or violence, you know, results in higher levels of gender-based violence. Even torture, forced marriage. I was once having this webinar series with a lady from Mpumalanga. They are working at an NGO, where she indicated that now in Mpumalanga, they are experiencing forced child marriage now. The issue that we thought has slept, the issue that we thought we are dealing with, it's now abruptly just coming out to say there are so many young women that are now being forced into what you call forced marriages, you know, because parents have lost jobs, there's no employment. Now they are they are going back to the culture of saying we are marrying off our young girl so that we can get that money for dowry or lobola, so that we can make sure that the young boy goes back to school, or we can make sure that things are maintained in the household. So that's it from me, focusing on gender-based violence, especially in the conflicts, also unpacking it further in different kind of community and context. Thank you, Juanita, and thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Teresa. I think the nice thing of listening to you is this really authentic voice, because sometimes we see in literature and we think, oh, well, it's out there, it's not in our at our doorsteps or things like that. But you brought it home. You brought it to us that it's at our doorstep in our communities, and it's across the country. So it's not exclusive in one community, but it's everywhere as we go through a country of turmoil and conflict and even violence. So I'm handing over now to Edith to take us into a bit of a deeper discussion, looking even from a workplace perspective. Over to you, Edith.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you to Teresa for introducing this session this afternoon and speaking more to gender-based violence in communities and also at family level. What I just wanted for us to talk about also is, why is it important for us to address gender-based violence? This is because of the enormous public health problem that it can potentially cause, and that it's often overlooked. And we speak of GBV more as a silent pandemic, because we don't really see it in action, and a lot of it gets swept under the carpet. So there are a lot of potential health consequences, negative health consequences that can impact on the victim or the survivors. And this can include mental health, depression, unwanted pregnancies, STIs, and also including HIV and AIDS. I just want to speak to the prevalence of GBV in our communities. And globally, we all know that at least 1 in 3 in every woman has ever experienced some form of gender-based violence. And when you look closer to home, last week we looked at GBV and some of the data coming out of South Africa, we saw that in the first quarter of this year, the SAPS report, for example, said there were 74% of all the cases that they received were sexual offenses. And of those, 72% were rape. And that really spoke to just over 10,000 women had been sexually violated in South Africa. We also saw that femicide in South Africa is at least 5.1 times higher than the global average. So this speaks or confirms that GBV is a global problem. It's happening internationally. It's also happening in our communities. And when I look at data coming out of Zimbabwe, it also confirms this, where we have that UNDP study, which says that 75% of women report experiencing gender-based violence. And of these people that report, 78% were men and 22% men. What this just tells us is that gender-based violence occurs to both men and women, but we focus more on the women because they're disproportionately affected by violence. And over 70% of the women that experience violence is from their intimate partners. So the assailant is known to them, and usually they're in a sexual relationship with that individual who violates them. And physical violence is also common and impacts on at least 41% of women, followed by emotional violence as well as sexual violence. When we look at what is GBV itself, it constitutes a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices. I won't go so much into detail about this because Teresa, in her discussion, already touched on some forms of GBV that we experience and witness in our communities. But basically, when you look at it further and say, why is this happening? You find that in our communities, we have the stereotypes of the gendered roles where we have said, this is what a woman must do and this is what a man must do. And this essentially is informed by our cultures and our traditions. And in our context, this culture is set in a patriarchal culture. And what this system does is that it has said men are superior to women. Men have more power, they have more resources than women. And you find that playing out not just at community level, but also in tertiary institutions. And you also see it at the workplace. And this has resulted in what we can call toxic masculinities coming from the community and acting out in our tertiary institutions. And we see this also in our workplace environments. And you find that men and women, girls and boys generally are not born with these characteristics or behaviors. They learn how to act from both the spoken and unspoken messages that they get within their family context, within communities, within churches, and in societies as a whole. And this creates the men and the women that presents within the workplace context, and also informs how they behave towards other genders. And then we just want to get to a point to say, why is this important for us to look at GBV and address gender-based violence from the context of the workplace? Why is this important for the workplace? Again, if I can draw from the data coming out of Zimbabwe, and I'm sure in South Africa, you will find many similar studies that will confirm the picture of GBV and harassment within our workplaces. In this study, 14% of the participants indicated that they had been sexually harassed at work. And of those participants, 75% of them were females. So again, confirming the disproportionate impact of GBV on women. And 48% of respondents said they had ever witnessed a colleague being sexually harassed in the workplace. What the study doesn't tell us, and what I personally would have wanted to know more of, is what did the witnesses do about that? What do they do after witnessing sexual harassment happening within the workplace? And 43% of the participants said that they were not aware if there was a policy statement or a sexual harassment policy to protect them from harassment within the workplace, which is again something that should inform employers that even when they have policies in place, it's more important to disseminate and to educate the employees on knowledge of those policies and how they can use those policies to protect themselves from would-be perpetrators, and if violated, and how they can seek recourse. When you look at the types of workplace-related violence and harassment, we see that within the workplace context, what typically presents more is like sexual violence, including exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And this speaks to like a quid pro quo between the abuser and their victim or the survivor. It can also be physical. A lot of it is psychological, including the verbal and non-verbal, and it can also be economic, including restricted access or threat to reduced income or loss of the employment relationship. So these are some of the forms of violence that we see within the workplace context. I want to say a little bit more about sexual harassment as this pertains to the workplace environment. This really speaks to unwelcome verbal, visual, or physical conduct of sexual nature that is severe and pervasive and affects the working conditions and has potential to create a hostile working environment. And in most cases, it ends up exactly doing that. And it includes your verbal or written comments about a person's clothing, personal behavior, a person's body, or it can even speak to lewd or sexual jokes. It can also include the physical space, where it can actually be assault. We've had many women report that sometimes male colleagues block them and block their movement in corridors. It can be inappropriate touching, petting, stroking, and hugging. So it's a whole lot. And when you speak to perpetrators, or when they are now asked to account for their behavior, most would say that they didn't know that there was anything wrong with what they were doing. So just to let people know that there's a whole wide range of unacceptable behaviors that can constitute sexual harassment. It can also include the non-verbal space, which can also be like looking at a person up and down in a sexually suggestive manner, derogatory gestures, as well as facial expressions of a sexual nature, and also very much these days include the virtual space, where the cyberspace, where you can get workplace harassment happening via email and over WhatsApp. And a lot of employers find it difficult to address harassment that happens in the virtual space. But the underlying tone of how and why violence occurs within the workplace context is that it is always about the abuse of power and authority within a workplace setting. And you have the perpetrators, which are usually the men, because of the stereotypes and the history of masculinities within our communities. It tends to be that the men are the ones who are in this very senior and executive positions within workplace settings. And you sort of find women operating at clerical, or most women would reach a ceiling at the middle management sort of level. So you have these powerful men who are in authority. They are also moneyed, and usually it speaks to the issues of blessers, which you also see happening within a workplace context. And sometimes these men do abuse that power within and authority to have sexual relations with their subordinates and younger people within the organization. But as I say that, I must also be quick to hasten that discussions that we've had also with university leavers and younger people within the workplace is that when you look at the interns who enter the workplace, for example, there's an understanding of how GBV or how sexual harassment occurs within the workplace, that sometimes the young women who we want to protect, the would-be victims, may also be wanting or may also be prying on the men within the workplace who wield power and authority, because they understand how it works within the workplace, and then they are also aware of how this potential power from the management in the organization can propel them or support their career advancement within the workplace context. So we also do get reports from the workplace, from the management, that sometimes it's very difficult to address, because the younger women are also prying or trying to get into sexual relationships with their management. And these are things that are actually happening and can be debated, but that the workplace should address. You also look at who are the actors, the GBV actors, who is a potential perpetrator and who is a victim, and how can they be protected. I think in summary, it's just to say that anyone within the workplace context can be an actor in the GBV matrix. In terms of the perpetrators at work, it can be your supervisor, it can be your boss, it can also be a peer, and it can be partners who are working with that organization within the workplace. And in terms of who, it can be anybody. And then we are also need to look also that sometimes clients of the workplace can also be perpetrators, especially for those clients working maybe in the banking sector, who have a lot of interface with the public. They are also can potentially be perpetrators of violence. And when you look at the workplace, it's important to understand or to unpack the potential hotspots within the workplace of where GBV could potentially occur. So it can, in the workplace itself, the perpetrators can be your co-workers, it can be the supervisors, and it can be management. We're also looking at a space where it can be third-party perpetrators, which include your clients or your customers. And what you find with GBV within the workplace context, that it has a potential to spill over into the private space, into the family space, and into the community space. And it's important for us when we address GBV in communities that we also expect to have a spillover effect of GBV within benefits to the workplace context. And when you also have programs or interventions at the workplace, you also expect those benefits to spill over to family and community level. What you find generally is that a perpetrator in the workplace environment is most probably also a perpetrator at home and in their community. So that's why it's important for us to look at addressing GBV also in those context. We also want to look at gender and just generally the workplace context for GBV and the disparities that are currently in place. And what you find there is that women are really lagging behind. There is so much that needs to be done in that space to protect women and to make sure that we create an equitable working space for women where both men and women can contribute to the workplace, and where we can also start to address issues to do with the global gender wage gap and look at what it is that we can do to propel women's leadership development within the workplace context. So that is putting it in a space of where does this link up with with the SDGs. And then looking also closer to the workplace environment, I just want us to look at some of the gender-focused obstacles to women's advancement within the workplace. You find that when you talk to women and find what is it that is stopping women from advancing within the workplace context, you find that women report that they feel undervalued, they are generally paid less than men, and they face sexual harassment within the workplace. And they are often excluded from the boys' club. Even when they do make it to board level, they find, or senior management level, they feel that they are not treated as an equal player. And oftentimes women get to the boardroom and get the sense that they are rubber stamping on a discussion that has already happened elsewhere, and usually in spaces where women are excluded, such as golf clubs or drinking spaces where the women are not invited, and meetings already happen. And by the time they get to the office meeting or to the boardroom, they've already agreed outside. And then you also find that generally we have corporate cultures where women report environment of favoritism and destructive office politics with a lack of general recognition and cutthroat competition, where women sometimes feel that the internal politics are just too much. And that's when you find that women withdraw from the leadership race because of these difficulties within the workplace. And this can also be difficult managers, but also alongside with that, they're also difficult colleagues. You find that when you look at who is really stopping women from advancing within the workplace, a lot of times you find that fellow women are also contributing a lot to keeping other women behind. When a woman gets promoted within the workplace, you find that sometimes there are rumors of women slipping their way to the top, and it's other women who start and fuel these rumors within the workplace context. So these are just some of them, the challenges that women face within the workplace context, and continue the GBV experiences of women within the workplace. So also that women ourselves, we are our own worst enemies, and we also provide an unsupportive environment for our female colleagues. We are kind of paying lip service to wanting women's empowerment and women's advancement. But when it comes to the practicality of the working space, you find that it's women who are penalizing and keeping other women behind. And then you also look at the penalties on women within the workplace, also include penalties linked to motherhood, and which make women unable to continue and advance within the workplace. And sometimes in some contexts, men actually make the decision that, oh, we don't want to recruit a female into this position because she is young and within 2 or 3 years, she's going to get married and she's going to want maternity leave. That kind of thinking, which the patriarchal community has made an influence on the male, who then presents within the workplace and fuels the kind of thinking that the toxic masculinities continue to further within the workplace context. So these are some of the things that we want to look at and say, how can we begin to address these within the workplace context? And I came across this that I wanted to share. I actually saw this circulating on WhatsApp, the labels that we give to women within the workplace. Every time you hear a woman being called aggressive within the workplace context, what that should tell you is that that woman is actually being assertive. Bossy women, we say, keep on leading. To those women who are said to be difficult, it is because they are speaking the truth, and we need them to continue to speak that truth. And those that are too much, it's because you are occupying space, and we want them to continue to take up that space, break that glass ceiling. And as you do that, please pull other women up and keep asking the hard questions. This is what we want to do with these programs, and to have the conversation continuing. I'm going to stop there, but in the presentation, you're going to receive it. I had looked at the risk factors for violence for women and also for men, and also what it is that the workplace can do to address GBV within the workplace, and why most violence does not get reported. You find that many people do not report gender-based violence within the workplace because of many reasons, most of them being economic, but also because it is difficult to prove. And because it happens in a private space and in secret, it's very difficult for the survivor to prove that violence happened. And people also don't want the stigma and discrimination that may occur after reporting a case of GBV. But that's not to say there's nothing that can be done. What we want to do is to promote for environments that really speak to a zero tolerance on gender-based violence within our communities and within our workplaces. And there are several ways that you can begin to do that in your workplaces, where you can look at implementing policies and programs that address gender-based violence and which really give structure for response to GBV within the workplace. And I just want to end by saying, as we think about what we can do in our tertiary institutions, in our workplaces, and in our communities, we need to focus also on the survivor and think about providing a survivor-centered approach to addressing gender-based violence. Thank you, Leon. Over to you.
Thank you, Edith. You gave us a lot to think about, and a lot of things that you've covered will actually come up and hopefully go much more in depth in upcoming webinars. But yeah, it's a very complex phenomenon if you think about the workplace, and that the workplace is the only legal space where one can take legal actions about these kind of things. So, colleagues, we want to open then the floor, asking Lizette just to see how she can maybe contribute to this conversation, because I had a quick chat with her now, and she feels that some of the things said here overlaps a lot. So we don't want to repeat too much. We want to keep the conversation going. But what I would suggest we do is, before I ask Lizette to add on, let me quickly introduce you to the two panelists that will also come on board. UNISA Kopp is an ordained minister from the Full Gospel Church. She's a full-time minister for the last 14 years. She's a level 5 religious professional person, and she holds a master in theology in dogmatics at the Northwest University here in South Africa. She's awarded the Lenti de Lange Trophy for Best Ethics Students for Faculty of Theology from the University of North West, and she's currently serving as the Vice President of Golden Key International Honor Society Alumni Committee in the Eastern Cape. Her hobbies include doing karate, mixed martial arts, singing, songwriting, doing research. Her passion is to help others achieve their goals, and she loves being involved in community upliftment. UNITA's motto in life is never give up. The next person that we'd like to also bring to the place is Craig Wilkinson from the Father Nation Foundation. He has been very active. Some of you have come across his work in the internet, social media, and even in the general media, radio and TV. He is also an award-winning person, a social entrepreneur that works around the issue of coaching men and dads. And he's playing quite a big role around working with men and often act as a keynote speaker. He has a lot of discussions around the issue of authentic masculinity, gender-based violence, parenting, and gender equity, and excelling into excellence. Drawing his experience is from being a single dad, raising 2 children to adulthood, and he is working with men. He has produced quite a lot of resources, and a lot of the resources are currently available on his website. But he also wrote a book called Dad, which talks a lot about personal experiences, wisdom, I apologize, wisdom and skills that he gained over the years working in this field. But also he ultimately bring forth that there's the second book that came out, It Is a Dad, that focus about also dads who are in expecting, and that looks and guide men in role during birth and also during pregnancy. Then Craig is the CEO of Father and Nation Foundation, an NPO that focus on restoring and equipping men to be great fathers, mentors, and role models. He believes that if we can help men and heal them, we can heal the world, including our own nation, and that thousands of men and families is touched by the work that he's currently doing. He is also supporting the whole thing around gender-based violence with a booklet called No Excuse for Abuse. And then he also then looked at another booklet called The Six Pack of Champion Values, looking at authentic masculinity. So Lizette, I'm asking you a bit of listening to all the 2 speakers who went really wide with this conversation. Please add on to that conversation based on your own experiences, where you come from, your area that you're doing research on, and then I will ask you, Anita and Craig, to also pose questions to the speakers. Over to you, Lizette.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you to the previous speakers and the detail. You know, for the topic for today, I think we unpacking this enormous challenge we have in the world and in South Africa, in our individuals as people, in our families, our communities, and then also hopefully to a level where we can address it culturally. I think we need to be honest about a couple of things, and part of this is that this is learned behavior. And I think all the work that Edith spoke about, that also we see in the bios of panelists, is about what do we do to unlearn that work. So that's the first issue. The second issue is around that GBV occurs on different levels, and therefore different strategies and interventions are needed. And often we hone in on a workplace or on a university, but that's too late in a way. When we're there, I said to the registrars in a meeting last week, when we're there, we firefighters. We need to put out this fire that's consuming our people, and that's too late. So we need to go back to the individual level. And I'm sure in the work that Craig and other people are doing, and some of our participants in the workshop is also busy with, is to really hone in on value-based interventions. What is the context and what is our values? And I often find, and given that this is also in a religious partnership based in with our religious communities, how do we define an issue like respect? And we can have leaders, but then when you unpack that, or peeling the onion, then you see, but the person acts in this context like that, and at his work like that, and at his home like that, and so on and so on. And hence, when you work with perpetrators, sometimes people will say, I am so shocked. I couldn't believe that this person is a serial rapist or a serial killer or a woman abuser in an intimate partner violent relationship, because we didn't address the context. And the context on an individual level, what is those values that we grew up with? And often it's paradoxical, right? So you will regard yourself or your dad or people you're close to as people that carries the value of respect. And yet that is also the person that can be the perpetrator. So it's a very, very difficult thing to do. So on an individual level, we need to hone in. Out of that, we are people that are relational as human beings. We need others to define ourselves. So in relationships, what is that we were brought up with? And in the work we did with students, and male students in particular, abuse was present. And if you go and look at the risk factors for a predisposition to offenders, you will find that child abuse is one of those factors that for both the victim and the perpetrator becomes an issue, and or some sort of an indication whether that person can have a predisposition to either be a victim or to be a perpetrator. And it's interesting in that dynamic, because if you look at perpetrator statistics as we having it now, there is limitations. You will see that males are predominantly perpetrators and women are predominantly victims. So it's interesting what happens to that behavior. Both of the children were targeted in a household, let's say with physical abuse, and in a lifelong pattern of being abuser or a victim, women tend to fall into the victim role, men tend to fall into the abuser role. And we need to understand that context and why that is happening. And it goes back to our culture, our society, and the values we hold, that women are less than and men are superior. So there's a lot of work that we need to do on families. And with that link is our institutions, our educational institutions, our religious institutions. And marriage, for instance, is formalized in both of those institutions and acknowledged. And yet it is in that context that we are the country with one of the highest intimate partner violence. So all the people that went to churches or religious ceremonies to get married, it is in that context that we also have intimate partner violence. With that, I think on a society, and this is what I learned through the work with perpetrators specifically, there's three things that we do as people. We deny the extent of the problem. We rationalize the problem and we minimize the problem. And if we can work through those defense mechanisms on an individual level, a family level, interpersonal level, a community level, because they need to be at some point zero tolerance for this. And we need to stand up for it. It's schizophrenic in a way that we have a country that can be led by a person who's also a rapist, or a church that can be led by rapists, or a university that can have at its head a person who's a sexual harasser, and it's known. We need to shift the context. So I think, Leon, for me, those are the things that come to mind for context. In the university, and we will address this in upcoming workshops, and that's forms of GBV. And we can also see how some forms get new meaning in every context. And I think Edith spoke about sugar daddies. If you take first-year students, for example, how in the research that we did, how at registration periods, the people will sit in cars outside the university, work with securities of the university to lure these young girls in that has limited resources. For instance, how we got a new term, we can create a new dictionary for GBV in the realm of academic abuse. In one university, they call it blanket degrees, for instance, and how as a community, the context and the culture accepts that. So I think, Leon, that's all from me. I did prepare, but I thought it will be a huge repetition specifically on Edith's work, which is very valid, and she also referred back to university. So I think that can maybe start the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lizette. And yeah, I think it's very nice to see how all three of you bring it nicely together to set the tone even for the upcoming webinars, where we will really unbundle this whole thing and some of the sub-themes and go into much depth discussion than we are currently talking about it, because I think sometimes we are so overwhelmed with what we see in a webinar like this, with so much information that sometimes it's just too much. And we will then go into a kind of a space where we just chew it a bit down in smaller pieces and go deeper, that we get to the roots of this. So colleagues, yeah, I also saw a shocking thing. The South African government just announced that nearly 14,160 teenagers between 10 and 14 were pregnant from 2020 to 2021. And that's what we know of. And that raises a big question that we haven't even spoke about, the whole issue of teenage pregnancy that is really ravaging the future of our children in South Africa. So without further ado, let me open up. Craig, can I ask you if you have a question or just a comment to the discussion up to now, so that we can then channel it to our speakers? Then I'll ask UNITA to follow. Craig?
There's so much to comment on, and just thank you so much to the three speakers. It's a beautiful presentations in a very, very unbeautiful topic. Well, one of the listeners has come up and said, you know, how do you deal with this kind of abuse if your own family doesn't acknowledge it? And all those you go to just sweep it under the table, and they don't acknowledge what you're going through. I think it's absolutely crucial that we find allies. Anyone who is a victim of abuse, the biggest challenge is the fear and the inability to break out of this. And I think what's so absolutely crucial is to look far and wide for someone who will hear you, who will believe you, and will stand with you. Because to so many women in an abusive situation, getting out is the hardest thing. And just being seen and heard and acknowledged and finding a way out, finding allies and support is so crucial. And it can also be dangerous to that person, you know, because if you tell someone that you're being abused and they don't believe you, and then they go and report that to the perpetrator and they gang up against you, it's a real issue. So the issue of us finding allies is absolutely crucial. People who will stand with us, believe us, see us, and take us seriously. And the other thing I just wanted to comment on and just to throw back is, you know, Lizette, you spoke about values, and it is all about values. But the primary source of values to us as we grow up, the primary teachers and modelers of those values are our own parents. And so for me, one of the biggest issues in South Africa, and that, you know, the fact that we have the biggest issue of gender-based violence, is a lack of fathers. In most houses across South Africa, there's a mother, whether it's an aunt, a gogo, an older sister, but for up to 70%, there's a lack of fathers. And fathers need to be present to teach their boys how to behave, where to draw the lines, what no means, how to respect women, etc. So parenting, and specifically fatherhood, and then developing and growing allies in our stand against this is absolutely crucial. So thank you so much, Leon, and thank you so much to the speakers.
Thank you, Craig. UNITA?
Thank you, Leon. Thank you, presenters. I have one question for each presenter, for Teresa and Edith. And my first question to Teresa is, in the cases, and I'm speaking specifically about when gender-based violence occurs in an intimate relationship, where the perpetrator is known intimately, and it becomes a recurring event. Do you think the beginning of the violence against this, let's say for instance, it's a man committing the gender-based violence against his spouse or against his girlfriend, do you think some women allow the first few incidents because they feel inferior? Or is it a perception that they are fearful to lose their partner? Why is it that some women do not speak out before often it becomes too late and they are driven to take their own lives, or not speaking out, and they just they don't know how to control it, and it spreads out in the rest of the arenas of their lives? What do you think is the main cause for women not speaking up? We heard from the one attendee that she spoke up but nobody believed her. That is one possible reason, yes. But Teresa, from your perspective as a young South African woman, what do you think is the determining factor here?
Thank you for that question, Anita. Okay, I'm just going to tap into personal experiences with friends, actually, because there's one friend of mine actually going through this. Okay, that will just be violating their name, but mostly harassment, coming from the background where you've seen your parents having divorce, and you don't want that. As she's a single mother, also same age as mine. We had kids at the same age. So she says now doesn't want to become a single mother because she's also raised by a stepfather. And now she's allowing that because now she doesn't want her experiences to be her child's experiences. But at the same time, she's going through the very same thing, just that with the biological father of her child. And see, another thing is fear of failure of a relationship. We have this judgment of saying women. There's this saying in bedding, it's like the mother of the child like holds the knife at the sharpest end. So I think that's just a direct translation. So we have this mentality to say a woman has to keep it together. The first time it's like, okay, I'm the one who made him angry. You don't believe or it can, you being terrestrial as you are, can be abused. You really don't believe, or okay, no, it's not abuse for me. He was just trying to teach me a lesson. Maybe I angered him, and also lack of knowledge what it means actually for gender-based violence, because it's not only physical, it also goes beyond just physical, and most people are focusing on only the physical part. That isolation where you're not even supposed to be talking to your family members, they isolate you, they manipulate you, everything is your fault, and then they start stigmatizing or discriminating or body shaming so that you don't have anyone to fall back on. So that's another reason why women don't talk, because manipulatively they would have manipulated you already, so that you don't see it as his fault, it's your fault. Now you're blaming yourself, and looking back you think, okay, I've been with this person for so many years, how can I just walk away from all the years? This person has done this for me, this person has done that for me. It doesn't click at that moment that this is abuse, until at a later stage where things are just worse. So those are just personal experiences responding to the question you raised, Anita. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Teresa.
Teresa. You have a second question to Edith and then to Lizette.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Teresa said. You were speaking about body shaming, and it came to my mind that gender-based violence also attacks the self-worth of the victim, often letting the person question their self-worth. So that is what I derived from your answer. I really appreciate that for opening that up to me. To Edith, I just want to say with you, as I was seeing all the statistics that you were sharing, that the cases of gender-based violence is absolutely far too common. And that's why we are so blessed for this webinar series and for this collaboration. Because we really need to get to a place where we bring it out in the open. But my question to you is, you were mentioning stigma, people that are being stigmatized. And I can just imagine how awful it must be for a woman at a workplace to not be able to speak out against the things that she is experiencing from her colleagues. I just wanted to in 2 or 3 points, can you give us some advice? How can we break the silence or encourage women in workplaces to break the silence of the gender-based violence or the transgressions that they are experiencing in their workplace? And how do we destigmatize this? How do we bring women to a place, or victims, to rephrase, to a place where they feel welcome and secure in the fact that they can share what they are going through? And how do we approach this? What would your advice be?
Thank you, Adita, for that question. And I think really for the workplace, there is a sense from the survivor or from the people that report that there needs to be a sense of that their case will be handled in confidentiality. They have to trust the employer's interest or support structures in place. They have to trust that the employer will provide for adequate support for the survivor. That's number one. Secondly, they have to trust that the system itself for addressing a potential GBV case within the workplace will be treated confidentially, that even the investigation will be conducted in a confidential manner, and that action will be taken. And you find in a lot of cases, if the perpetrator is a senior manager within the organization, or is even the MD or the CEO, women will not report, because they know that they are the ultimate, the buck stops with that individual. So there has to be an understanding that something is going to be done about it, and that the confidentiality of the survivor will be maintained, and that people will not know who the complainant was. And then there is also generally within the workplace judgmental attitudes which stem from an understanding of why GBV occurs. And you find in a lot of cases, the male colleagues within the workplace, they blame the survivor. They start to look at, oh, she was dressing like this, she was coquettish, she was flirting, and start to look at all the other things. So you find that people end up blaming the survivor, and in future, others who also may be affected don't report, because they know that people are going to start scrutinizing their personality and how they were conducting themselves within the workplace context. So those are the issues. So definitely a lot of work still needs to be done in that space.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you very, very much. It occurred to me when you were speaking that we need to get systems into place in society where it brings kind of the message that all perpetrators will be dealt with according to their actions. And we need to bring awareness and put systems in place that verify that no perpetrator is untouchable. I think when you mention CEOs and so forth, I think we need to get to a place where we instill those values also in the corporate spaces to make sure that our employees are safe and that they can be dealt with confidentially, and that it will not mar their careers if they do speak up. My last question is to Lizette. Lizette, thank you very much for bringing to the fore the fact that there are terms where they reflect on these ladies that are underprivileged, that feel compelled to do certain things, and that attain blanket degrees. That was very, very informative, and it's very sad at the same time. I think we should also look into curbing this occurrence and to see how we can actively stop what is happening, how we can put systems into place to help them to not feel that they have to engage in these actions. My question to you, I know you've worked on cases with pedophiles and that you have a vast knowledge of these perpetrators and their patterns and how they apply the violence and the control that they exercise on their victims. I want to ask you, Lizette, I think Edith mentioned it, but I wanted to direct the question to you. Does a perpetrator choose more than one victim, and how often does that occur?
Thank you, UNITA, and I also would like to hear specifically Craig and maybe Edith or Leon on this, because they also involve with perpetrators. You know, the statistics is very, very telling. With child sexual abuse and just in general, the first time when a perpetrator gets convicted, he's about 35 years of age. Now, a perpetrator's career starts at around 16, 14, around there. So by that time, an average is being picked up of between 50 and 120 victims. Then also, if he's not catched by 35 and dealt through by the system, which, I mean, the conviction rates are very low, the next spectrum of age that they do capture and convict is 55. By then, it looks, the statistics is 500 plus victims. What you also get is that in some cases, perpetrators will hone in on access. So you will find a person in a profession, like a teacher, a religious leader or church person, or a hospital or children's home, or single mothers, big targets for access, which then it's a more lazy type of perpetrator, if you can put it like that, because he don't have to go and hunt like they do. The one that comes to mind is in the park, he lures the child in, abduct the child, but it doesn't work like that. So the problem is enormous. If you look at family dynamics, and I want to go to child sexual abuse specifically, because most perpetrators or serial rapists often starts in that context. I mean, they make it their lives to lure children in. And that's why the prognosis is so low, even if you catch them, to break that pattern. We had a number of projects that we started many years ago to put up systems exactly like the AA, that if the urge comes, then there's a number, there's a sponsor, and so to find. We tried that in a university in South Africa as well. It went well, but it was very difficult to sustain that type of system for the guys. Hopefully with the pedophile register and a perpetrator register, it will also become more and more difficult just to move around, because one of the things that I also do is the moment when there's a noise in the system, they move to another environment. So the number is hard to equate, but this child sexual abuse statistics is telling. With the perpetrators, the serial perpetrators at universities, it's evident that often just before they can get into that disciplinary, they move to another university. And there is, I mean, the fertile ground for perpetrating there is huge with lecturers. And that's why you also look at the risk of power dynamics. More power you have, the more likely you can perpetrate. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think
It does, thank you.
Because you really made us aware that, you know, statistics is often an abstract of a reality, that there's a story behind things. And I think this is why the webinars are also here, is to unravel these kind of national statistics that we often see, but they're often meaningless because they don't tell the human story behind everything and the complexities that we are dealing with in dealing with this topic. Colleagues, I'm going to bring this discussion to an end, because there is so many things as we just start to open this conversation now, that I can see in the chat, you know, people asking about What do we do when women are accused for looking for kind of gender-based violence or even rape, just the way they dress, the way they act, the way they behave. But then it talks a lot about how we are still socializing both boys and girls. And that means we have to really look at our younger generation, but we should not come into a space and say, well, the burden is on the younger generation to change it. It's actually within us to start the change, and it starts today, not tomorrow, not a week away, today. And we need to do it in our friends, because in many spaces we go with our friends and we have even a kind of celebration of some of these toxic behaviors that exist out there, that we celebrate them, we acknowledge them, and we reward them. And that means that we have to stand still and look even in our social circles, how do we reinforce this kind of continuous breakdown of the human spirit, because that's what it's all about. It's actually breaking down the humanity that is within us. And then to look also within our families. If we are having children, to look at the way we raise them, but also to act that they can look upon and say, I know, I can see it from my dad or my mum, that this is how they are acting, and they are, also human, making mistakes, but I can learn from them, and I can actually become the child and the parent and the adult that they want. So it's really everybody's business at the end. And it's not looking for answers out there, it's looking for answers within. And with that, we want to invite you, please return and come back to our next session on Thursday at 1 o'clock. And we will re-advertise the rest of our webinars and invite you to please send out to your networks and encourage colleagues to come in and post your questions. Even if we don't, email us, that we keep the conversation going, even if we are not in the same space. I'm handing over to Anita to wrap up the day for us and give a word of thanks. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you to all the presenters for your fantastic input. We appreciate it tremendously. Thank you for the panel. Thank you to our MC, Leon Roots. This was a very, very fruitful session. I just want to speak to all the victims out there of gender-based violence. If you are a victim yourself or someone that you know is currently going through it, you are worthy. You have self-worth. You have a birthright. You have a right to speak up. Break the silence. And as Leon said, don't wait until tomorrow. Start making an active change today. And let us all just uplift these victims and help them to rebuild their lives. This has been a wonderful session. The next session will occur on Thursday at 1 p.m. Please send and resend the links that we are sharing on social media. And from the Golden Key Southern Africa head office, we just want to say thank you to all the collaborative partners, all the attendees. We appreciate you so much. May you have a lovely few days until we meet again on Thursday. You are now welcome to leave this session by clicking the leave button at the bottom of your right hand of your screen. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. Goodbye.